Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on October 16, 2024. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Ray McGovern. Ray is an American political activist and former CIA officer. He was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, he chaired national intelligence estimates and participated in preparing the daily briefs for the US president. He received the Intelligence Commendation Medal at his retirement, but returned the medal, I understand, in 2006 to protest the CIA's involvement in torture. Ray is a co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, a group of former officers of the U.S. intelligence community formed in January 2003 who, shall we say, adopt a dissenting point of view on much of U.S. foreign policy. So thank you so much, Ray, for joining me today.
You're most welcome, Dimitri. Glad to be with you.
So, Ray, I want to focus our discussion for the most part on the unfolding crisis in West Asia. But I'd first like to talk to you about the recent allegations leveled against RT, the Russian state broadcaster, by the United States government. And by way of background, for the benefit of our audience, you and I have spoken once before. That occurred 1 year ago, right after the October 7th attacks, when we were both invited onto RT's Crosstalk, along with Lebanese journalist Marwa Osman, to discuss Israel's response to the October 7th attacks. So you've been on RT before. I understand you've been on RT on a number of occasions. And the recent allegations against RT, as I understand them, are essentially that it is an arm of Russian intelligence. And in a statement issued by the State Department last month, the administration alleged that the RT platform was Russia's destabilizing arm, according to new information, much of which originates from employees of Russian state-funded RT. And I'm quoting here, "We now know that RT moved beyond being simply a media outlet and has been an entity with cyber capabilities. It is also engaged in information operations, covert influence, and military procurement, which are operating or targeting countries around the world." So, Ray, what do you make of these allegations?
The British have an expression called bollocks. It's a kind of polite way of saying BS. I know RT. I don't know anything about these nefarious activities. They might be true, but so what? Is RT or the Russians the only people to use members of the press for such nefarious means? Check your history. So let me just tell you a little bit about my record with RT. As soon as we formed our little group, now it's a fairly big group, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and that was 2 months before the war in Iraq, and we warned people there were no weapons of mass destruction there, and there were no ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. That was a sort of a subtle way of associating Saddam Hussein with 9/11, for God's sake. Most Americans believed that he had something to do with 9/11 when the attack came. So we were spreading truth around like we used to professionally. That was our job. We tell it like it is. Now, we weren't welcome very much, but we did have more resonance. We did have more acceptance in the media then than we do now. That's the penalty of being right and telling the truth. So Archie very early sort of asked me and other members of our group, VIPS, to come on and speak our truth, okay? And it was really quite amazing. I'd go to buy a pair of slacks at a big department store, and the Indian American who came up to me said, "Oh, you covered! I saw you at RT," and then the lady in Fresh Fields who cut the bread for me, said, "Oh yeah, that's my customer. That's my customer." So lots of people were watching, not primarily Americans. So anyhow, the one thing about RT that I need to impart to you, and I've said this before, is that all the other stations, which were interviewing me then, not often, but I was on CNN like twice a year, BBC maybe 4 times, lots of other mainstream stuff. The one thing that distinguished RT was they did not even ask for nor expect a pre-interview interview.
Right.
Fox calls, and says, "Okay, McGovern, we understand you don't like Hillary Clinton. It's not that I don't like her. I just think she's not telling the truth. Well, what would you say to this? What would you say?" And I'd say, "Oh, well, Mr. McGovern, we're overbooked now. We can't, we can't have you on, right?" And it's happened all the time. It's happened with all of them. Okay, CNN, even Amy Goodman, for God's sake.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Well,
were they pre-interview you on Democracy Now.
no, yeah, but not as intrusive. I
Yeah.
mean, they pretty much know where I was coming from. But yeah, they would ask me, what would you say to this and so forth. And they shut me down for about 6 years. If I didn't get arrested and beat up and put in prison, I didn't have a chance to get democracy now. Anyhow, it was that bad. So at one point, when I was on with one of the more prominent RT America interviewers, I said online, I said, now, Anya, Anya, did you ask me for a pre-interview interview? And she looked at me like I was from Mars. No, of course not. Why do you ask me that question? I
Mhm.
said, well, I just wanted your audience to know that everybody else does. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty distinctive. So was I able to say what I wanted to say on RT? Yeah, I was. Was Putin speaking to me through any piece? No, he wasn't. Yeah. Was I in Putin's pocket? No, I wasn't. I was telling the truth. And to the degree it coincided with what Putin said, well, the truth is the truth, for God's sake. Just because Putin says it doesn't mean it's a lie. So
Yeah.
anyhow, that was my experience with RT. I still let myself be interviewed by Sputnik Radio in Washington, D.C., which had a going thing until yesterday when
Garland
they
Nixon and Wilmer. Yes.
too
Their show was I was on yesterday, their last episode.
Oh, were you? Well,
Very
the
disturbing.
distinction, but my God. Yeah, I used to go on with, what is it, Dr. Wilmer Leon and
Yeah.
uh, sidekick. Well, anyhow, I used to be on there maybe every week or so, and 20 minutes, I'd have a chance to say what I thought, or 15 minutes. Anyhow, so to see that shut down, and to see that our First Amendment, our First Amendment, which is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, uh, I mean, yeah, I know a little bit about American history, not as much as I know about Russian history, probably, but I know that back when the Constitution was being drafted, and it was being drafted not only by James Madison, but also George Mason. George Mason was really the key on all this. And when it came in final draft that they could get approved, Madison said, "Here it is, George." And George read it and he said, "Sorry, Jim. Sorry, I can't sign on to that." And Madison said, "Well, Jim, I mean, George, for God's sake, you drafted most of it." Yeah, it doesn't have a Bill of Rights. It can be a tyranny we'd be establishing here without a Bill of Rights. So, long story short, Madison, in those days, gentlemen kept their promises. Madison said, "Look, George, you just keep your mouth shut, okay? Don't say anything about this. I promise you, I'll send horsemen up and down the eastern seaboard. We'll get that Bill of Rights ratified. We'll put it in the Constitution if you just hold your peace now and don't make a big stir, okay?" And that's what happened.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
that's how important it was to our founders.
Mhm.
Uh, and the First Amendment, of course, is gone by the board in our country. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech. I mean, Julian Assange was convicted, an Australian citizen, convicted for practicing journalism. So
Psychologically tortured as well. Psychologically, that
yeah,
was
yeah,
the judgment of UN Special Rapporteur that he was
yeah,
experiencing torture. Yeah.
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 Well, Niels Melzer turned out eventually became a friend of mine, and this is it's parenthetical, but it's interesting, I hope. He established that the way they got Julian Assange initially, and you probably know this, Dmitry, is these trumped up charges of rape.
Mhm.
Rape is the most powerful arrow in the quiver of intelligence services. People want to smear you, people want to put you beyond the pale, okay? Now, those two incidences of intercourse in Sweden were totally consensual. The only reason these women went to the police is because after they thought, oh, wow, it was unprotected. No, we want to make sure that Julian has a AIDS test so that, we know we're okay. And Julian said, look, I just had one last week. I'll wait around, see if there's any further. Well, the Stockholm police and the Swedish intelligence, our brotherly intelligence service, whomped that up into charges of rape. And when he got to Britain, all that came down on him, and you know the rest of that story. So all I'm saying here is that Julian was initially apprehended and put under this great cloud by these extraneous, meretricious charges of raping these women. These women were beside themselves. Now, getting back to Niels Melzer, the UN rapporteur for torture, well, he went to Sweden. He was interested belatedly in Julian's case. He went to Sweden, and they didn't know that he is fluent in Swedish. Okay, Swedish. And so he read all the police documents. He, my God, this is awful. These women were up in arms saying, we don't say he raped us. All we want is to get an AIDS test, for God's sake. This is awful. And all that's right in the police documents, but we're in Swedish. Niels building. So, long story short, the degree to which the powers that be could distort history and get away with it, well, they can't always get away with it. Niels Melzer was a really steadfast investigator. He did a lot to rehabilitate Julian's name, and his successor was also quite good. Sorry for the digression.
No, not at all. Not this is such an important subject. Our right to free speech is being assaulted 6 ways from Sunday. And I just want to throw in my 2 cents, Ray. There was an article. I probably at this stage one of the few Canadians who appears fairly regularly on RT. I'm not paid for any of that, by the way. I've never been paid for it. They've never put any restriction on what I can say. Like you, I've never been asked to do anything, any kind of a pre-interview. They give me access to the audience, and I can express my opinions without restraint. I see no reason to reject the opportunity. And in Canada, there was an article that was co-authored by 2 senators in the Canadian Senate and a guy who is presented to the Canadian public as a disinformation expert. And it was in the go-to newspaper for the Canadian political elite a couple of weeks ago. It was called the Hill Times. And in it, they called upon all Canadians who continue to appear on RT to be investigated for potential crimes, just for appearing on RT. So I promptly went out and I did an interview on RT and tagged the 2 senators and this disinformation expert in my social media post. But the point here is there's no reason to believe that RT is in any way, shape, or form restricting our ability to express our honest, fact-based views to the public. And I couldn't agree more that it would be a serious impingement on our right to free speech to deprive us access to those platforms, especially when others are not interested in speaking to people who have dissenting views. In any event, I want to turn now to the question.
The other thing here, full disclosure, I've been paid by RT. Okay. Did I ask?
There's nothing wrong with that at all. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Let me explain this.
Sure.
When they were celebrating their 10th anniversary, that famous thing at the dinner where Putin came in and who else was there? Jill Stein and General Flynn, and it was the big thing where everybody was working for RT. I got an invitation because I had been one of their regulars. And would you come to London? We're going to have 2 days. We'll put you up in a hotel and we'll pay for your fare. I said, you pay for my fare? He said, yeah. I said, I'm there. And it was really interesting. I mean, it was very, very well orchestrated. And sure enough, Putin comes walking in at this major dinner. And now I was sitting at one of the back tables, so I was one of the first to see him. Did they go? No, no fanfare, nothing. One security guy. We had all been, pretty much searched, okay? One security guy, he marches in, he waves to Gorbachev, who was sort of halfway down the aisle, and he goes up and he makes a little nice speech about RT, thanks RT. And then he sits down while the Russian Army chorus does several songs. After half an hour, he gets up with this one security guy and he walks out. Nobody, nobody even, well, people noticed that somebody was walking out. It happened to be Putin, So that was really an interesting sort of thing. But it's
Right.
the only time that RT gave me anything, and that was because I couldn't afford to go to London for a couple of days for a celebration like that, and they paid the way of everyone, almost everyone. I think Jill Stein was smart enough to say, no, I'll pay for myself, right?
Right.
But it's the only time. I never asked for anything, nor did I expect anything, uh, except for one occasion when I had to park in a really pricey parking lot downtown Washington for RT America. I live on a modest budget, and so I said, "Hey, they're charging me $16 for parking here for this hour. Can you give me that?" And they gave me that. So full confession, full disclosure.
Sure. Sure.
That's that's how the Russians have paid me.
Right. And it just, I think people should know this, but in case they don't, major US and other Western news networks do pay people who come on, expert commentators on a regular basis. And some of them make quite a bit of money, as a matter of fact. So nobody calls their integrity into question, at least nobody in the mainstream, because they get paid. In any case, let's move on to this increasingly dire situation in West Asia. And I want to talk to you about something that happened just in the last 24 hours. We chatted about it briefly before we started our recording today. So I went to Beirut on Friday for the fourth time since the October 7th attacks. And for the 11 days prior to my arrival there, Israel bombed Beirut relentlessly, particularly the southern suburb of Dahia, where Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated a few weeks ago, along with hundreds of Lebanese civilians. And I was expecting the carnage to continue. And to my great surprise, the day that I arrived, the bombing of Beirut stopped. And there wasn't a single attack during the 4 days that I was there. I returned on Monday on central Beirut or Dahia. Not a single attack. I was quite surprised by that. And then yesterday, the day after I returned to Greece, the Lebanese prime minister announced to the media that he had been given assurances by US government officials that the Israeli forces were going to take it easy on Beirut going forward. They were going to reduce their attacks on the capital of Lebanon. And sure enough, what happens this morning? Israel resumes bombing Beirut, and in fact, repeatedly struck Dahia, which, by the way, is very densely populated. In normal times, there's an excess of 800,000 Lebanese living in that part of Beirut. And I think, Ray, I've seen this dog and pony show before in the last year. Certainly, my perception has been that repeatedly the US government, usually it's Blinken, is trotted out to say, we don't want a wider war. We want to defuse the situation. We're making it clear to our friends in the Israeli government that we need to de-escalate the situation. And almost immediately, Israel does something that's escalatory, sometimes wildly escalatory. Now, the conclusion that I've come to is that the US government is lying, and the US government, in fact, wants the escalations to occur. What do you think is going on? Is it that they can't control Israel? Is it that they are under such intense pressure from the Israel lobby that they're letting Israel get away with escalations that they would prefer not happen? Or do they want this to happen?
Well, first off, Dimitri, Has the have the Lebanese authorities asked you to come back real quick so the bombing can stop? Actually, the coincidence is quite astounding. The day after you leave, it starts to get. I'll be in more serious now. Uh, this question has come up very often now in the last couple of weeks. Uh, is Bibi uncontrollable, or does Biden and Blinken want him to do this kind of stuff? Well, it's sort of it's both end in my view. It's a distinction without a difference. Uh, what I know, I've observed the last 25 years up close and personal as I could get it in the Middle East after continuing to watch Russian behavior. And what I know is that, for example, um, when former National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, distinguished three-star general, worked for the first Bush, and he was really a really establishment guy, really careful about what he said to the press. Well, he was shunted aside into a more than honorific, but he was chair of the president's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board during in the beginning, the days before, the months before the attack on Iraq in March 2003. So he could see all the stuff that was going down. It was no secret that if Saddam Hussein didn't sit on a pile of oil, this might not have happened. There was no secret that the U.S. coveted permanent military bases in Iraq. They changed that not to permanent, enduring. Remember the enduring military bases there, right? Okay. But the big factor, and I've come to see this more and more lately, was Israel. Israel wanted this, okay? Israel's had, well, here's what Scowcroft did. After watching all this, in 2004 or 2004, I think it was, he went to the Financial Times and he said, I just have to tell you something about who rules U.S. foreign policy. And it's this: Ariel Sharon, the prime minister before, one of the prime ministers before Netanyahu, he has Bush, little Bush Jr., wrapped around his little finger. Got that? Wrapped around his little, he's got him mesmerized. Okay, and you can quote me. Okay. Next day, Financial Times publishes that. My God, what was Scowcroft trying to do? He never speaks out of turn. He would never leak or say anything inadvertently. He wanted the American and the rest of people to know that this was Israel. This was Netanyahu with Bush wrapped around Netanyahu, not Netanyahu. It was Sharon in those days, Ariel Sharon, who was a big shot that really impressed this little guy from Texas. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, that was 2004, if memory serves, just a year after the war. In 2001, Netanyahu is caught in this living room speaking live on video. It's a living room of real close supporters, people, friends of his, political supporters. And he says, turn off that video camera. And the guy, for some reason, didn't do it. Okay. So we have Netanyahu saying, you know, it's it's so easy to bend the Americans to what we want to do. I mean, hello, 80% of the American people support us. That is absurd, end quote. So that's 2001. You can find it. Last time I looked, it was still there on YouTube. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means to me that it is the likes of Sharon and Netanyahu. Sharon playing a huge role in getting us involved in a war of aggression against Iraq, and then in Syria as well. We have good evidence that the Syria whole thing was at Israel's instigation, the CIA involvement there to try to to try to depose Bashar al-Assad. Um, just to finish the Syrian thing. In early, well, not early, but during 2013, when things were really going from bad to bad to bad to worse in Syria, there was a chemical attack outside of Damascus. Okay,
Mhm.
uh, it was blamed immediately on Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad. So at that time, the New York Times bureau chief, her name was uh, Ruderin, Jody Ruderin. Okay, now when you're the New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem, you got access to all kinds of people, right? So she goes and she talks to major Israeli figures. Some of them retired, like Alon. I'll remember his name now in just a second. But anyhow, she talked to these big. She said, "Now, what's your preferred outcome in Syria? I want to I want to write something for the New York Times." And Alon Pincus is this
That's
fellow's
right.
name.
Yeah.
He used to be, well, he's still very valuable there. He prints a lot of stuff, and it's not so bad now. But he had been head of the UN, Israeli delegation to UN. Anyhow, so he's in the know, and he says, "Now, Jody, this doesn't sound really good. Okay, what our preferred outcome in Syria is no outcome." Says, traduisez, s'il vous plaît? No alcohol. Well, again, Jody, this doesn't sound really good, but as long as Shia and Sunni are at each other's throats, as long as there's chaos in Syria, Israel has nothing to fear from Syria. So our preferred outcome is let the blood flow. Let it just continue. That's our preferred outcome.
Mm.
Now, the miracle happened the next day when Jodi's piece that she wrote, bless her heart, appeared as the lead in the New York Times. When was it? Early September 2013. Okay. Where were the censors? They were all out in the Hamptons sipping martinis and stuff, so she got it, but it's right there. All you have to do is read the thing to see what was up on Syria. So you have the Israelis largely responsible, more than oil, more than permanent military bases, largely responsible for Iraq, largely responsible for trying to get rid of Assad or letting Bedlam reign in Syria. And so we know the rest of the story now. So how did I get off on that tangent, Dimitri? Bring me
Well,
back.
what I was most intrigued about, you started out by saying, because I actually kind of feel the same way, but I'm curious to know why you said it's a distinction without a difference. That
Well, you
whether
know,
it's the U.S. government wanting permanent military bases and using, an oil and using Israel as its attack dog in the region, or whether it's as I say, I actually agree with that observation, but I'm curious why you say that.
yeah, well, that's a good question, as usual. It has to do with my my trade. I was a glorified journalist, okay? I was not a researcher, okay? So I was required when I worked at CIA as an analyst to report daily, okay? And when I was briefing during Reagan's first term, the president's daily brief, one-on-one with his senior advisors, Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, and finally we got the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff in that little loop. We worked as a team. Two of us would divide those people depending on where they were in that particular morning. So that's how we tried to keep people informed, and that was unique access. We never had personal access to these people before. We always sent a written copy, a really polished copy to Kissinger, for example. He'd look at it and tear out this page, and he'd put it marginalia. They don't know what they're talking about here in this page. And if they ever gave it to Nixon, well, yeah. Anyhow, so I'm a journalist. I keep up on things day to day, and I'm still doing that now. it's a craft you can continue to do in retirement because guess what? When I was a Soviet analyst, about 75% of the information you needed to make cogent conclusions on what was going on in the Soviet Union was from open sources, a discipline called media analysis, subdivision of political analysis, I guess. But all you have to do is pay real attention and read and listen and see what he says the next day. This kind of thing. You can see when they're ready to deal. You can see when they're not ready to deal. You could see when they're ready to deal on a anti-ballistic missile treaty. And I was privileged to be the chief of the Soviet foreign policy branch when Nixon and Kissinger asked us, do you think they'd really like to have a treaty? And we said yes for two reasons. They don't want they don't want to have to compete with us in spending stuff, but also they're afraid that China is about to steal a march in relations with the US and China, and they feel themselves in stiff competition. They ideally would like to have a much better attitude toward the US so that they could stay in the game. And then, of course, they said, Kissinger said, well, can we, will they cheat? And I said, don't know. And he said, well, how soon could you tell me? So I go back to the people that we had running the satellites and all that stuff. And I said, well, if they cheat, how soon will we know? And they said, week, 10 days. So I brought that back. That's enough. We can trust if you verify. That started with Nixon and Kissinger, not with Reagan. It became a big thing with Reagan. So that's the idea. Trust, but verify. And I'm happy to say that our technical people played a huge role in that. And we played a political role and said, yeah, they're ready to deal. And these are the reasons why they're ready to deal. And that ABM treaty, I was in Moscow for the signing, May 1972. That was the bedrock of strategic stability for 30 years until younger Bush decided, man, we don't need it anymore and got out of it. So uh, I guess
how does this relate to the question of these are incredibly fascinating historical facts, much of which I didn't know, by the way. For example, I thought that the trust and verify, but verify came from Reagan, as you indicated. Surprised to hear that it came from Nixon and Kissinger. But when you say that there's not that this question, of whether Israel is controlling U.S. foreign policy or the neocons are controlling U.S. foreign policy in Washington, why does that matter? Should we care? Or should it affect the way we as citizens approach the problem? Or does it really not make a difference at the end of the day?
Well, when I said it's a distinction without a difference, I was talking broad range here. And what I'm truly trying to say is that when you follow things day to day, okay, when you're responsible for reporting, and I still hold myself responsible for reporting mostly on X now or on my website, which is raymcgovern.com, or whatever people who interview me, then you get a certain gloss on things as how things change day to day. And I would say back 30 years ago, well, yeah, there's ample proof that the U.S. neocons were going to use Israel as they'd like to use Israel, and it includes their influence in the Middle East. But sort of that's no offense intended here. That's academic. We're here today, Is Biden a Zionist? Well, he brags about being the biggest Zionist in the world, okay? Is he susceptible to Netanyahu's influence? Well, just look how he hugged him the day after, 2 days after October 7th. Does that make any sense for America? No, it doesn't make any sense for America. It doesn't have to make sense, okay? And that's what Scowcroft was trying to tell us, okay? Israel has this bind on us. One of our VIPS people, Aaron Katowski, was a light colonel in the Air Force, and she sat right opposite Rumsfeld's office. And what did she see before the attack on Iraq? All kinds of Israeli generals and Israeli high officials congregating in Rumsfeld's office with Douglas Feith, one of his deputies. Okay, did they have to sign in? No. Did they pass security? No. They would just so they had the run of the place. There's lots of evidence that I know about that they have special privileges, so to speak.
Mhm.
So yeah, in answer to your question, I think it really mattered more about 3 decades ago, but now the die is cast. I think that Netanyahu has Biden wrapped around not only his little finger in his hand, but a little finger in his hand. And Biden is not all there, but he knows, number one, that he's got to be 100% behind Israel, and number two, that he represents the most powerful nation country in the world. That's
Mhm.
what he 60 Minutes. Got that?
Right.
The
They
most powerful.
could fight a multi-front war without even breaking a sweat.
That was his answer to the question. Could he handle Middle East and Ukraine? Well, huh? We're the most powerful in the history of the. Did you understand? In the history of the world. Now he believes that, and Blinken and Sullivan wet behind the ears still after 4 years, they act as though they believe that. And that's a real problem because if we're not the most powerful country in the world, if Russia, China, and Iran have gained a march on us, well, our policy needs to be flexible enough to make sure that we exert the kind of influence we could in Israel. And suffice it to say, if we were really, if we really wanted to prevent the genocide, and I have to say that as an American, I blanch before saying that my country is not only enabling, but permitting, allowing genocide in Gaza. If we wanted to stop that, we could do that tomorrow. Telephone call to Netanyahu. Forget about it. We're not going to give you any more arms. Better come to terms the best you can. Boom. It would stop. Everyone knows. Israelis have said, the Israeli high officials have said, yeah, it would stop because we depend so heavily on U.S. armament. So the U.S. is full bore behind Netanyahu. I'd like to, if unless you have another question, bring it up to date as to how I see things evolving since October 1st. That major.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to this is exactly what I wanted to ask you next. But before I invite you to answer, I just want to give a little context to our audience.
Yeah.
Uh, there, there was this attack by Iran on, I believe it was October 1st, in which it's quite clear that dozens of Iranian missiles penetrated through Israel's. We don't know exactly how many, nor do we know exactly how many were shot, but it's clear from video evidence that dozens penetrated and struck military targets, particularly the Nevatim Air Base. And it is also now a fact that Israel, when it tried to enter into South Lebanon, began to experience very severe, relatively speaking, casualties. 8 soldiers died, I think, on the first day that they tried to cross into the border. And then 2 nights ago, there was a really massive blow delivered to the Golani Brigade, which is reported to be Israel's elite forces, when a drone struck, at least one drone, struck a cafeteria on a military base in South Haifa, not on the border, in South Haifa. And Hezbollah, over the last year, as you probably know, Ray, has published surveillance videos taken by its drones, which show all kinds of military assets in northern Israel. And they've now demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can strike them with precision. So from where I stand, with no military expertise, Israel's in real trouble. That's what it looks like to me. But at the same time, Netanyahu is saying straight up, we are going to attack Iran. I think he even said that they're going to do it before the US election. Now, he did have the good sense to say, whether it's true or not, I don't know. We're not going to strike the oil facilities. We're not going to strike the nuclear facilities. We're going after military targets. But whatever it is that they're going to strike, he's saying straight up, we're going to strike Iran. So with that as background, Ray, Do you agree with my assessment that Israel is in very serious trouble? And what do you think these lunatics are going to do now? Because I know that it's difficult to make predictions of that nature, especially when you're dealing with these characters, but we're in a real world of pain and danger as far as I can tell.
We sure are, Dimitri, and these are exactly the right questions. First, let's deal with that drone attack on that military facility while they were all having dinner. They're well south of Haifa, so that's still northern Israel, but it's pretty far south for these drones. Those clever Hezbollah folks. They went in an uncharted way, in an unexpected way. They violated the rules of drones by going around the Mediterranean. They were coming in from the west. My God, I make a joke, but that's what happened. Okay, and there was no defense. The Israelis did not shoot either of them down, as I understand. So
Mhm.
this is big. And they said just four killed, but I imagine many more than that. And they said something like 68 or so injured. Well, this is, as you say, the top-notch brigade, and they can't hide that kind of thing because Israel has a fairly free media, I dare say freer than ours.
Mhm.
Okay, so that has to do with that. That was a big deal, okay? Now, with respect to that October 1 attack, uh, we have an expression in intelligence, it's all smoke and mirrors, right? Well, the Israelis deliberately blew smoke over this key airfield so no satellite could tell what happened to all the, well, there were several, 12 or so rockets that hit there. And the reason we know that, some people, even some people in the desert, the Bedouins had these iPhones and so that stuck up and down. So there was appreciable damage to this major military facility. And as I understand it, one reason they could do this was they knocked out the radar first. Okay. There's a big, really expensive radar that could have homed defensive missiles in, and that was knocked out first. And then they had sort of free reign to do damage. We still don't know, at least I still don't know, what the readout is of the battle damage there to that airfield. But there was supposed to be F-35s on it, or at least in bunkers. So we'll know that a little bit later. So the whole thing for this last since October 1st, what we got now? We got the 16th. So 16 days, what are we Israelis going to do? So Netanyahu says we are going to strike. We're going to strike hard, and everybody else, Gallon, the defense minister, we're going to strike. We're going to give them. Oh, okay. Well, then why don't you do it? Well, Yom Kippur, we don't want to do it. Yom Kippur, and so everybody's saying, "Whoa, it's going to happen. It's going to happen." And McGovern's the only one that I know of that says, "Well, you got to try to explain why it hasn't happened." I mean, they keep. So could it be that the Israeli military, which has gotten a real bloody nose in Gaza and now in southern Lebanon, by all reliable reports, they're saying to Netanyahu, you know, we don't want a regional war because Iran can do exactly what it did against that airfield on the 1st of October. They have hypersonic missiles. We don't have them. The Americans won't give them to us because the Americans don't have them. The Americans haven't figured out how to make them, okay? Then here's Sharon. Ah, come on. The Americans will always come in and help us. You can depend on it. It's absurd how 80% okay. Well, the military says, well, have you talked to the Americans? Well, yeah, well, I'm just going to send Gallon, the defense minister. Well, wait a second. All of a sudden, Gallon doesn't come. Why? Because Gallon's opposite number is this fellow named Lloyd Austin, right? Defense Secretary in our country. What's Lloyd Austin going to tell Gallon, their defense minister? He's going to say, you guys really want to do this? It's a little embarrassing to say we can't give you hypersonic missiles because we don't have them. They have them. They can pretty much ruin Israel, destroy Israel. So you sure you want to do this? Yeah, we want to do this. Well, go back and tell Netanyahu that we have our direct contacts with President Biden, and we're going to tell him this is a fool's errand, and that if he decides to support you full bore, as he seems inclined to do, we're going to tell him that's really bad idea, Mr. President. Whoa. So what does Gallant do? He doesn't go. They know what he's going to meet, right? So he stays. Then they have a cabinet meeting. Then they have a war cabinet meeting. And what do they decide? They don't decide anything. So the days continue to go by, and nothing really happens. So my speculation, the third day into this hiatus between Netanyahu's demonstrated willingness and to counterattack. My speculation is that our military, that is the U.S. military, finally has found that it has some cojones, okay, that it has some backbone. And after rather embarrassing defeats in Ukraine and supporting the folks in Gaza, they're finally saying, look, Mr. President, uh, Netanyahu is going AP on the Hershey Highway, as we used to say in the Bronx. I mean, he's really, really rabid, and he's going to get Israel into a place where he's going to come to you before the election, and he's going to say, "Mr. President, you got to bail us out here. We're deep into Lebanon. We need your Marines in there. We need everything that you can do. The Iranians won't listen to us anymore because they think that you're waffling." Well. Now, who's Netanyahu's lawyer? A fellow named Antony Blinken is Netanyahu's lawyer, and he's arguing for this is the neocon wet dream, to go in there and get rid of Iran at the same time as everything else. So we got Iraq, we got Syria, we got Libya now, Lebanon, Jordan, no problem, but Iran. That back in 2002, the neocons in Washington were saying, "Well, all right, we'll do Iraq, but real men go to Tehran." Do you remember that? Real men. Okay, so they're saying the military, in my view, is saying, "Mr. President, look, you listened to us last time, and this is big, Dimitri. Blinken and his opposite number in the UK went all around Europe a month ago, getting support for authorizing the Ukrainians to use these longer range missiles to strike further into Russia proper. Okay, so it was all but a done deal. Some very important newspapers were saying it's already a done deal. Starmer, the head of the Prime Minister of Britain, is coming to Washington with a target list of how they're going to do this. The Storm Shadow missiles are the British missiles, but they have proprietary software from the U.S. So not only do they need permission in a political sense, they need permission in a technical sense to use these Storm Shadow missiles. Same goes for the Scalp, the French variant, and the ATACMS. We only have a few ATACMS. So anyhow, the military goes to the president. This happened on the 11th of September. Okay. And they said, look, Mr. President, it's a really bad idea. And Starmer's coming tomorrow. It's your decision, of course, but we think it's crazy it's not going to make any difference in Ukraine. It's going to just alarm the Russians. And we don't know what to expect from the Russians. They've been pretty blunt in saying, oh, as a matter of fact, Putin just said, that was the next day, the 12th, that they're revising their nuclear doctrine to take into account countries that support people like Ukraine with technology or with weapons that hit Russia. So, we just bad idea. Well, long story short, by the time Starmer comes, Blinken has been overruled, okay? Ignominiously overruled. So Starmer sits down and somebody from the press asks President Biden, so what do you think about this? And he turns on me. He's really disgruntled. He's really disappointed. And he says to Starmer, in effect, put away your target list. We're not going to prove it, okay? We'll be no decision on that. Okay. Why did we go into all that? Well, it's not unprecedented, but in recent years it is. Nobody stood up to this lawyer for Netanyahu, whose name is Antony Blinken, and Jacob Isaiah Sullivan, who also is a neocon and also a Zionist. Nobody stood up. But in this case, that Sullivan was said to have sided with the military, and that was enough. Biden was really angry, but he acceded to the military. Now, this is on the record, okay? That's what happened. Everybody knows that now. The sequence of events, that's what current intelligence analysts or journalists do. They boom, boom, it was incredible. 11, 12, Friday the 13th, the thing went down, and Biden finally told Stromer, we're not going to do it. And that's still the case as far as I can say. So what am I saying? I'm saying everybody knows what happened, especially the Israelis. So here, what are they hearing from their military, their own military? What are they hearing from the U.S. military? And what they're hearing is, look, we don't want to get involved in a regional war on behalf of Israel. Will they be able to dissuade the Sullivans and the Blinkens and or dissuade the president despite Sullivan and Blinken? Who knows? But there's a big, big quantity of uncertainty here. And when you're going to start a major regional war, the last thing you want is a lot of uncertainty. And as far as I know today, what, the 16th, after 16 days, we still have no decision on exactly what Netanyahu is going to do. Instead, we have these incredibly cynical statements leaked, one by a letter by Austin and Blinken saying, "Oh, you better let aid. People are starving. Did you know that people are starving? You got to let some aid in, and we give you 30 days to do that." Well, 30 days. What does that mean? It means after the election. So I don't know how this is going to come out, but I think that the Israelis have been given pause. I think they realize they can't do this. That
Mhm.
is, the military at least realizes they can't do this without U.S. support. And
Mhm.
Netanyahu, 80%. It's absurd. I think that Netanyahu still believes that if he gets in over his head in Lebanon, or I dare say vis-a-vis Iran, that Biden will have no other option uh, during these next 3 weeks. Three
Mhm.
weeks today or to yesterday is the election. And he'll have no option. He'll have to support Israel, our close ally. And as you know, there's no defense treaty between the U.S. and Israel. And so to call Israel an ally is not true in the juridical sense. And that makes a lot of sense because, well, let me one more little vignette here that I know from my colleagues. After the uh, after the war in which the Arabs did attack Israel, so 1960, 1973, right? Okay, 73. Uh, it looked pretty nip and tuck there. I mean, they were not really sure that the Israelis could prevail this time, but they did. Okay. And then after that, Kissinger went to the Israelis and to other Arabs like the Saudis and said, look, here's the deal. Let's do a mutual defense treaty. Okay. That way, these Arabs, these ragtag Arabs, nobody's going to fool with Israel. We have a mutual defense treaty. So what do you think? And I know people who are involved in broaching this to people like the Saudis. Would this be okay with you? All the time. Okay, so what do the Israelis say? Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you very much. But no thanks. That's what happened. No thanks. Why? They say no thanks. no thanks to having a treaty with the most powerful country in the world. And then we were in 1973. Okay. Well, a mutual defense treaty requires each party to sort of let the other party know if they're going to go attack another country or, it's sort of etiquette, and it's all usually in the treaty itself, yeah. And the Israelis don't want to ask permission. They always want to ask forgiveness if they just do what they want to do, okay? And the other thing is that a mutual defense treaty requires mutually internationally recognized borders. Okay. The Israelis didn't want to go there. So here we have an instance where the Israelis turned down a mutual defense treaty with us. That's not so much on the record, but I can tell you that I heard from several of my friends who were involved in this. And I was actually working for Bill Colby at the time. He was the director of Central Intelligence. And so I was plugged into a lot of this stuff. So the Israelis think that they have carte blanche. They don't have to ask permission. They ask for forgiveness, maybe afterwards. They learned in 1967 when they tried manfully to sink the USS Liberty, killing 34 U.S. sailors, injuring 170 plus U.S. sailors, that they could literally get away with murder. Okay. And it's been that way ever since. And I've quoted you for Scowcroft and others. And so, yeah, it's a really sordid tale, but I think it's unraveling right now. And I place some hope. Um, and I'm an outlier here. I don't, everyone else said, oh, it's sure to come. The Israelis are sure going to come. Well, yeah, something will come, but it'll be, in my view, so circumscribed that Iran will have no
Mhm.
excuse. Iran will not be shamed into retaliating in such a way that Israel will never exist. And those are the equities there right now. Sorry to carry on so
No, no,
long.
no. I derive great comfort from the fact that you think just maybe, these people are going to act sensibly at this stage, at least to some degree.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I also want to say that one way you could interpret the statements that are coming out of the Israeli government, uh, I just throw that as who knows, but is that they're going to attack Iranian military targets in Syria, which they've done repeatedly. And this will be their safe face-saving measure. They can say we retaliated, but it wouldn't necessarily be of the scale that would precipitate a counter retaliation that is more painful than the one delivered on October 1st. I guess what do you think that might be what they have in mind? That they might be thinking, we're going to strike the Iranians in Syria and say we retaliated?
Um, it's really hard to say. There are U.S. forces in Syria and in Iraq, about 1,000 in Syria, 2,000 plus in Iraq. Those are the things I think we have to worry about because if Iran needs to retaliate again, those seem to be the most likely targets. One little detail I wanted to juice to what I said just a minute ago. We have high, what are they? The high altitude defense missiles going to Israel with 100 US GIs to man them. Okay.
This is the THAAD missile system. That's the way the press is referring to it, right?
I got it mixed up with the HIMARS. Now they're the THAADs. They're the Theater High Altitude Air Aircraft.
Right.
Whatever they are. Okay. So, wow, what if 48 missiles in one of these things? And they have a really neat radar. Okay. Well, and they're going there right away. Okay. Now, how many THAAD missiles exist? Most people say, well, maybe 1,000. How many do the U.S. need for their own armed forces? Well, nobody really knows, but we've been very largesse type and giving them to giving them to, whatever, Ukraine. And so how 48, if they shoot them all off, two to a Iranian missile, that's the way they usually do it. Well, how long will these THAADs last? Not very long, okay? So will they make a difference in this equation? The answer I give is no. And I was a military analyst for 2 years in military Army intelligence. Okay. I was a infantry intelligence officer back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, if you can believe it. So I know a little bit about this kind of thing. And the notion that well, let me just say that I think, and this again is an outlying kind of outlier position, but let's assume, let's say that the U.S. military did prevail on Biden, and Biden authorized Austin to tell Gallon, "We don't want you to go attack Iran full bore." Okay. Now, how is he going to let Israel down easy? Well, here's a consolation prize. We're going to give you THAADs, and THAADs are really, really accurate. There are only 48 of them, but we're going to send U.S. personnel with them. Oh, yeah, so with that. So I say that possibly, this is speculation, possibly as a quo for the quid of not taking off against Iran to the point where the U.S. would have to come in and rescue Netanyahu, pure and simple. Now, am I right on that? Well, what I do know is that there are a limited supply of that supersonic missiles, or I would say hypersonic missiles that Iran has, I don't think that is good against them. Neither was their big radar that one of them knocked out real quick. Even Biden a couple of years ago admitted there's no defense against hypersonic missiles. So those are the realities here. And I'm just hoping that even though I'm an outlier, I've been an outlier before, I've been wrong before many times, but maybe I'm right this time, and we can breathe a little easier during these next 3 crucial weeks. The wild card, of course, is Netanyahu. He's
Mhm.
got his political future, but his personal freedom at stake here. If he stops being prime minister, he goes to jail. He and his wife, they have a bridal suite all ready for him. The people don't like him in jail because he's guilty of sin. 3 cases against him, okay? So what will he do? I don't know. I wouldn't put it past him to say, the Americans can always be dependent on coming in to support me, particularly before an election. And now what will he do? That's the wild card. Can he do that if the Israeli military say, not a good idea, not a good idea? Would the Israeli military rise up? Is it possible that they see what craziness is going on, not only with Netanyahu, but with Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all these people? Uh, there is a professional caste there in the military in Israel. They have been pretty independent. They've never done a coup, but they do things short of a coup. And this time, I think they're going to try to clip Netanyahu's wings. Whether that will work or not is something that not even McGovern will guess at.
Hang on to your seats, folks. It's going to be a wild ride, whatever happens. So I have one last question with you, Ray. You've been very generous with your time. Uh, and it's something you brought a piece of news to my attention before we began this interview today, which I found quite entertaining in a sick sort of way. And that is that Joe Biden is going to Germany. And on the 18th, according to the office of the German president, Biden is going to be given the highest honors that the German state can bestow, some sort of elaborate military reception. And this is happening, interestingly, this profound honor being bestowed upon the US president just days after the Danish press reported something quite interesting in the Nord Stream affair, which is that I think it was a Coast Guard officer or personnel around the time in the days leading up to the destruction of Nord Stream. He found some US naval vessels in the area of the attack, and they had turned off their communication equipment or their transponders. And he went out there thinking maybe they need help. And when he approached them, they told him to get the hell out of there. And so this and a
And
whole bunch of other, I'm sorry.
not to mention this to anyone.
Yes, exactly. You're right. I forgot that important detail. So, um, I'm just curious in closing your reflections upon these glorious military honors that are going to be bestowed upon the US president in this context.
Well, it would be amusing if it weren't so damn serious. This was a Habermeister, okay? And his boats or ships detected some strange goings on there, right near where the pipeline was actually exploded just a couple days later. And as you say, they had their transponders or whatever they have turned off. And so he sent his little ships out to find what's going on, and they found, oh, these are U.S. naval ships. And they reported back to the harbor master, and he reported back to Copenhagen. Copenhagen, don't say anything, for God's sake, don't say anything. Recall those ships, get them back. No, he didn't say anything until just, it's almost 3 weeks ago now, okay? And I guess not everything's rotten in Denmark. I mean, there's one Yeah. One reason honest guy who said, well, this is a cause célèbre, I'm going to be on, I'm not going to keep quiet anymore. And he told his story. I went back in my files and I found that just at that same time, there was a civilian, a corporate satellite analysis agency, a satellite photo analysis agency that found the same thing. Ships during the same period, just a couple of days before the thing blew, right in the same area, U.S. naval ships. Okay. And that was reported, but then forgotten. Now, have you heard this in the mainstream media? No, you haven't, right? Uh, does Cy Hirsch have chapter and verse about all this? Of course he does. So I've done a
Oh, by the way, we have heard it on RT. I should, so, but go ahead. Sorry for interrupting you.
wonder, you're
Yeah.
trying to sow discord. That's what you
So,
Anyway, I know a little bit about Germany. I served there 2 tours, 5 years. I have a lot of good friends still there. And I've often asked them, well, how could you, such an energetic, such a enlightened, such a smart people, did do what you did during Hitler's reign? Why were you so submissive? And I never got a real straight answer. But there is a book written by a fellow who was a young lawyer in Berlin. He was training to be a judge, okay? And this is early 1933. His real name is Raymond Pretzel, but he made a name for himself later as a writer in post-war Germany. Sebastian Hafner was his name, okay? Now, he wrote this diary during those crucial months in early 1933 as the Nazis gained power. And he kept it in his attic, and his children found it after he died, and they published it. Die Geschichte eines Deutschen is what it's called in Germany. Here it's called Defying Hitler. But this has relevance to what I see as, well, not to be, not to, well, what I see as typical spousal abuse syndrome. I mean, it's sort of like, well, let me talk about what's going to happen. You already said that he's going to get the highest civilian award that Germany can give. And here is Olaf Scholz, who either was told several months before the destruction of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 that this was going to happen. Even the president in Scholz's presence said it was going to happen if the Russians invaded Ukraine, which of course they did a week or two later, when a very gutsy Reuters woman correspondent asked Olaf Scholz at this joint press conference, well, uh, President Biden says he's going to do this, but you control. What do you have to? Was halten Sie davon, Herr Kanzler? What do you think about that? And Scholz goes, well, yeah, we 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 do everything together. Together we do everything together. So, is the German press, the German public able to say, well, did you do Nord Stream? Did you explode Nord Stream together, Herr Scholz, Chancellor Scholz? Or was this a surprise? And which is worse? Did Biden not tell you about this? Or did he tell you about it back then, months before? So it's clear. Um, Not only has Cy Hirsch given chapter, I reread his thing yesterday. It's incredibly detailed, provable, uh, and just the fact that the New York Times won't run it, that speaks volumes too about freedom of the press, right? It won't run.
Plus, perfectly consistent with the fact that Biden confessed to the crime before committing it. I mean, we're going to bring Nord Stream to an end. I mean, with what more do you need? At a bare minimum, they should be the prime suspect at a bare minimum.
Nolan had said that weeks before, and Tony Blinken, after the whole thing was exploded, he got up and said, it's a really great opportunity for getting rid of Russian influence and substituting our own energy. I mean, the guy is nuts. He's pretty much admitting this was a great opportunity. Way to go. And Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister now, he was a member of parliament then. On the next day, he said, "Thank you, America," and a big tweet. Then he had a picture, a photo of the area there in the sea. So what am I saying? I'm
Sorry, go ahead.
saying here yeah, I'm saying that I still don't understand the Germans. Uh, it's been what, almost 80 years since the end of the war. Why are they so slavishly submissive? Why are they demonstrating now uh, spousal abuse? When spouses or lovers are abused, they go back to their lovers for more, and they're they think they're themselves guilty. Okay, so here was Steinmeier, uh, what's his name? Frank Walter Steinmeier. Who is he? He's the president of Germany. He was in Kiev, or his representatives were in Kiev, participating in the overthrow of the duly constituted government of Yanukovych back in February 2014. And he was one of the major factors behind the Minsk Accords, where Angela Merkel later conceded that this was just a big charade. It just gave the Ukrainian forces time to be trained and equipped by NATO. So look at them now. 9 years ago they were nothing. Look at them now. So Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, the other villain in this piece, said the same thing. So they diddled the Russians on Minsk, and so Steinmeier was a big player here. Okay, I had a friend who was like this with Steinmeier, went back decades, okay? And through that friend, I got an audience with Steinmeier, his principal deputy for Russia, Ukraine, and all that, back about 7 years ago. That was in Germany. So I went into his office,
But
and
this is after the coup.
this is after the coup, yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Mhm.
So I said, let's talk about, what's happening now in Ukraine and, after the coup. And he looked at me straight in the face. He said, "What coup?" And I said, "You were there, weren't you?" "Well, yeah, I was there." "What coup?" Well, I said some pleasantries or unpleasantries after that and just left. 10-minute interview. So this was his main guy. What coup? He later landed, became ambassador to Turkey. So you get you get big things for saying the right thing or telling the lie. So the other thing is that I mentioned is that during that same time I was in Germany, I visited the Bundestag to several members, and again through a mutual friend. I got an audience, a whole hour, with a fellow named Wolfgang Helmich. Who was he? He was chair of the Defense Armed Forces Committee for the Bundestag. Big deal. What was he? He was SPD, Social Democrat Party, right? So it happened to be the same day that uh, Anacondia exercise, Anaconda, I should say, the biggest armed forces exercise since World War II happened. Okay. So the news came in and I assimilated that. So one of the first questions I asked Helmut, Wolfgang Helmich, I said, Herr Helmich, what about this anacondia thing? And he looked sheepish and he said, well, we're not involved. We're not, as a country, we're not involved. I said, the reports are German troops are involved. Helmut. Well, they're just not. Yeah, well, some have to do that. So what do I take away from that? Here's the head of the Armed Services Committee in the Bundestag. It's clear what he thinks about Operation Anaconda. I mean, look at the word, for God's sake. You're going to strangle somebody, right? Okay. And he doesn't approve it, but it just happens and it's beyond his purview. It's all politics. So, just to continue here, more briefly, spare your audience. So after all that, I went back to defying Hitler, Die Geschichte eines Deutschen, and I looked at what this young lawyer in Berlin, watching after the Reichstagsbrand, the burning down of the Reichstag, 9/11 has been likened to the burning down of the Reichstag. It was blamed on some communist, and of course, everyone believed what Hitler and the others said. It was too dangerous not to believe them. And so here's just a couple of sentences. I'll read from the English version, okay, defying Hitler. This young lawyer says the following quote, I really don't see that one can blame the majority of Germans who in 1933 believed the Reichstag's fire was the work of the communists, and that one can blame them, and what one can blame them for, that is the Germans, is what shows their terrible collective weakness of character clearly during the first part of the Nazi period, is that settled the matter with sheepish submissiveness. The German people accepted that as a result of the fire, each one lost what little personal freedom was guaranteed by their constitution, as though it followed as a necessary consequence. As for the communists burned down the Reichstag, it was perfectly in order that the government took decisive measures like raiding your desk, like doing other things like that. It's quite in the ordinary that this would happen. So there is a parallel there. And I looked up the word for sheepish submissiveness because it's quite striking, isn't it? It's schlafsmäßigen Ergebenheit. Ergebenheit is just kind of fold, right? Schlafsmäßige is sleepwalking or like a sheep being submissive. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that uh, President Biden is going to Germany to get the biggest medal the Germans can give after having ruined the German economy. For God's sake, Volkswagen is letting off workers for the first time. Thousands and thousands of workers. The Germans no longer have access to the cheap gas in those Nord Streams pipelines. And so what are they doing? What is this? This must be, uh, I wrote down the term. It's a psychological term. It's the abusiveness that a battered wife syndrome or battered lover, you you not only don't criticize them, you hide what they did, and then you go back for more. You give them a medal, my God. So I used to have some hope that 70, back 60 years after the war, the Germans would grow up. You could understand after the war that act like children, right? Okay. Maybe Willy Brandt comes in, they start acting like adolescents, and he's got some really good ideas. Now they should be able to act like adults 80 years later, right? They don't. So it's this sheepish submissiveness that not only lets them fold in with these crazy policies that are destroying NATO, actually, and making West Europe much less secure, but now they're giving an award to the chief perpetrator. So I just wanted to say that I was thinking that through. I just got word that Biden's going to go there. The German press is saying, yeah, they're going to give him this, and let's say he makes it. Is this going to help Kamala Harris? Will he be able to walk strongly enough to accept this memo? Are they going to give him the medal sitting down? I mean, there's a lot of things that don't make much sense in Washington. I hope, with respect to West Asia, that the common sense and the newly found cojones from our military will prevail. I can't guarantee it, of course, but Biden and Germany, they seem to be, well, I don't think Scholz is going to be chancellor for very much longer because there's a really vibrant opposition. I don't mean just the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland. I mean Sarah Wagenknecht, who
Mhm.
broke off from the Linke because the Linke forgot that they were Linke. Yeah, the Linke.
Which means the left, I understand, right? Right.
And she has polled very, very remarkably well in those early elections up there in what used to be East Germany. And she'll do less well in the ones in the south and Bavaria and in the western part of Germany. But she's still a force to be reckoned with. And this all happened. She founded the party just several months ago. They're already flocking to her as an alternative to the Alternative for Deutschland, which on immigration and other matters are so right wing. They resemble Trump, if you will.
And I have the displeasure, Ray, of living in Greece and being a citizen of Greece, which is a vassal twice over. We're a vassal to Berlin and a vassal through Berlin to Washington as well. So it's not a moment we're living through where it's proud. It's possible even to be proud of one's European citizenship. Frankly, it's just what can
You
I say?
may know this, Dimitri, but we tried to sail on the U.S. boat to Gaza in 2011. There were about 40 of us, some pretty high level people, much more high level and senior than I, some people from the New York Times and some from AP. We bought the boat, we outfitted it, and it was all set to go. Okay. We were going to break the siege of Gaza, 2011. We had letters and we had food supplies. We didn't have any weapons, but the Israelis didn't want us to come. Didn't
And
want to.
we stopped you. Yes, I
Well,
know.
they told Obama, look, we won't be responsible for what happens to these people. Look what happened last year to the Mavi Marmara. Okay, that could happen again. And, if you have distinguished people on here, it's going to be so. So what did Obama do? He went to Greek leaders and he said, so how's your economy doing these days? And they go, oh, man, we need the IMF loan. And he said, oh, that's going to be kind of what we'd like you to do is make sure that you find some problems with the U.S. boat to Gaza and don't let them out of the harbor, okay? So they found a defect, guess what, Dimitri? In our air conditioning system. Okay. And they say, you can't sail. We sail anyway. We got 9 nautical miles outside of Piraeus. And then the Greek Coast Guard came in, very apologetic. We stopped and they said, please, please don't make us do this. We have orders to board you. Please turn back. Well, we argued with them for about an hour. Okay. The captain stood his ground and then finally he says, oh, here they are. We're just really going to board us. Better turn around. So we turn around. Now, that's how slavishly submissive the Greek government was,
Yeah.
understandably, because the Americans had the financial, they had by the short hairs, so to speak. And that's what happened to our attempt to go to Gaza. That was what, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
The siege is still on. We know what's happening.
It's
It's
all downhill from there. Ray, I'm so happy you said that story because, I want my fellow Greeks to know precisely what happened in that shameful moment when they stopped this incredible mission that you were part of. I've known this story for many years. I was a participant on the boat to Gaza a couple of times, and not enough people in this country know what
well,
we did in
yeah,
2011 to the boat to Gaza.
to be non-political or non-partisan here, it turns out the Turks don't have any more guts than the Greeks have.
Mhm.
I was almost on that big ship that was ready to leave in April,
Yeah,
bringing tons and tons and tons of supplies to Gaza. Couldn't go in the event, but a lot of my friends were on that. The Turks succumbed to some blandishments to keep it in harbor, and that they had to offload the cargo because the Turkish authorities were more influenced by the U.S. and by Israel. They would let them out of the harbor. So it's a kind of a nonpartisan, bicameral thing. Yeah, everybody's under the influence, and I mean that in both senses of the
right.
word.
Well, listen, it's been a tremendous pleasure talking. I can't thank you enough for giving me so much of your time, Ray. I really hope we can do this again. And you're welcome to, any opportunities you have in the future to join me on this program. I would cherish the opportunity to continue our discussion.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Dimitri. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on October 16th, 2024.